Couple of items to report under item number 2 here. Of course, today is Veterans Day, and so here in LaGrange, we have an outstanding American Legion post that had many activities, and we are very fortunate to have them within our municipal boundaries, and we thank all the veterans who live in LaGrange and work for the village of LaGrange for their service. We had a meeting of the Liquor Commission earlier this evening. I want to thank Liquor Commissioner Kotinek, who joined me in considering a license for a new owner of the 7-Eleven at 47th Street. The application was approved for a Class B liquor license, and that will be at a regular meeting scheduled for December the 9th. And we also have a couple of holiday events coming up that we'll want to promote and advertise and amplify for your awareness. One is Shop Local, which is the Unwrap LaGrange Holiday Shoppers Reward promotion. This is to promote the importance of shopping locally in LaGrange by the LaGrange Business Association. That will be a Shoppers Reward sort of promotion, and that extends from November 30th through December 24th. And there will be a special VIP holiday shopping preview night that will take place on Thursday, November 14th from 4 to 8. So look for more information on that. And of course, Small Business Saturday is November the 30th, which is a national initiative that we support and participate in. The next meeting of the Village Board will be on November 25th, which is a Monday, but it's a different kind of meeting. Every 2 years we do a strategic planning session, and so that will be at 7:30 at the Amita LaGrange Hospital. I've just been corrected. It's at 6 p.m., so I'll reset my schedule as well. Thank you, Andre. 6 p.m. I suppose that's because we've got a lot to talk about, and that will be in the conference room downstairs at Amita. That is open to the public. It is a regular board meeting. That gives us the opportunity to look more closely at our operations, our finances, and then really do cast our eyes down the road as to where we want to be in the coming years. So we have our regular business that we conduct certainly at these meetings, but we also like to take a moment in time every now and then and do the strategic discussions. We have some vacancies on the Zoning Board of Appeals in LaGrange. These are boards that are populated by LaGrange residents and appointed by this body here. We're interested, we have 2 positions open. We kind of have an interest in architects and engineers. They tend to gravitate towards this board, but that's certainly not a requirement. And we'll put the word out on our social media and our web page about those 2 vacancies, and we'll want to have those people up and running sooner than later. Tonight, we will be considering the tax levy for the coming year. This is not an action item tonight, but we're going to discuss it. This includes funding for our police and fire pension funds, and we're going to be looking at, inclusive of that is the library and the general operations. So overall, we'll be having an increase of slightly less than we did last year in terms of the pension levy, and we'll go through what that means in terms of how we get to the levy. It's tied to the consumer price index, as well as our own priorities and resource needs, and we'll walk through that certainly in detail. And I think what we'll do is when we also talk about the police and fire pension, we will do that while we're on that agenda item. So if there's public comments, we'll probably move that towards that specific item so we're a little bit more on top of that in our discussion. We do have a holiday coming up. Oh, I'm just about ready to run into your report, Andre. I do not want to do that. A couple of other items. I want to congratulate the Community Memorial Foundation. I was able to participate in their 25-year anniversary committee, which again, it was more of a strategic plan for that wonderful organization that really has lifted a lot of boats here in LaGrange. And they've got some big events coming in this 2020 year, which is actually their 25th anniversary. So stay tuned for that. But Greg DiDomenico does a great job with them and has involved the village in those discussions, and they certainly do a lot for a lot of people in the community. To the board, we may have a special meeting in December to reflect our progress on our agreement with the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, the MWRD, as it relates to stormwater management. We have to kind of calibrate to their schedule, so I apologize in advance. We may be convening for a short meeting. What day would that be? December the 2nd? 2nd. So we would post it up like any other meeting, and it would be December the 2nd at the same time we would normally convene at 7:30 up here in the Village Hall. Finally, on behalf of the entire Village family, to you, Trustee McCarty, we extend our heartfelt sympathies for the loss of your daughter, Nora McCarty. You are our family. She is our family. And so, again, to you, heartfelt condolences from all of LaGrange, truly. With that, Mr. Clerk, please read the items on the consent. Oh, Andre, I skipped over you. Please, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. Village administrative offices will be closed on Thursday, November 28th and Friday, November 29th for the Thanksgiving holiday. Regular business hours will resume on Monday, December 2nd at 8:30 p.m. The next regularly scheduled village board meeting will also occur that evening after the strategic planning session that President Livingston noted. As always, a full complement of public safety personnel will be on call to respond to emergencies, and we wish everyone a safe and happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you, Andre. I do see former trustee Jim Palermo here, always our custom to introduce former trustees. I'm sure he's here to talk about the holiday walk, so we'll wait about that. With that, Mr. Clerk, please read the items on the consent agenda.
Certainly. Matters on the consent agenda will be considered by a single motion and vote because they have already been fully considered by the board at a previous meeting or have been determined to be of a routine nature. Any member of the Board of Trustees may request that an item be moved from the consent agenda to current business for separate consideration. Item A, ordinance, creating an additional Class A2 liquor license, Madison Local LLC, doing business as the Elm Restaurant. Item B, resolution, appointing the village president and village manager to the position of director and alternate director of the West Cook County Solid Waste Agency. Item C, minutes of the Village of LaGrange Board of Trustees regular meeting, Monday, October 28, 2019. Item D, consolidated voucher 191111.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. And items on the current business agenda.
For current business, there are two items, and these items are for consideration of matters being presented to the Board of Trustees for action. Item A, LaGrange Business Association 2019 Holiday Walk, request for village sponsorship and hometown holiday promotion. Item B, preliminary review of the proposed 2019 property tax levy request.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. And before we get to item number 4, we have an action item for the Village Board's consideration. That is an appointment to the Community Economic Development Commission. I respectfully request your consideration of the nomination of Marty Dunn to serve as a vacant opening on the Community Economic Development Commission. Mr. Dunn has been active in the civic and public and private sector in and around LaGrange. He's expressed an interest and is willing to serve, and I would seek a motion on that.
I move that we accept his nomination for the commission, and I congratulate you on his selection. Second it?
Thank you, trustee Holder. Thank you, trustee McCarty. It's been moved and seconded. Any questions or comments on the motion? Trustee Holder.
I've known Marty for a lot of years. He's born here. He is exceptionally talented, exceptionally high energy and high creativity. I think he'll be a wonderful addition to this commission.
Thank you, trustee Holder. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, to the board, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Congratulations in advance to Mr. Dunn. We do appreciate his service, and thank you to the board. With that, we proceed to item number 4 on our agenda this evening, which is public comments regarding matters that are on our agenda this evening. Seeing none, let's advance to item 5, which is the consideration of our agenda.
I move
Consent.
that we accept the consent agenda as presented.
Second?
Thank you, trustee Holder. Trustee McCarty, it's been moved and seconded to accept the consent agenda. Any questions or comments on the motion? Trustee Augustine.
Just that in consideration of my relationship with the village prosecutor, I recuse myself from each item on the voucher related to the village prosecutor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, trustee Augustine. We have the Elm here. We'll probably ask you to come up and talk about some things, but if there's no questions up front, Mr. Clerk, roll call vote.
Trustee Gale.
Aye.
Trustee Augustine.
Aye.
Trustee Holder.
Aye.
Trustee Kotinek.
Aye.
Trustee McCarty.
Aye.
With that, the motion is approved, and within that body, of course, is the A2 liquor license for The Elm. And Dan Spain, would you like to come up and give us a quick update or tell us anything about The Elm? And thank you for being here.
No.
You know, when that microphone works, I'm going to fall off my chair, I think. Thank you, Milo.
So yes, very excited to be bringing this to the community. It's probably a little over a month away. We're expected December, but might go into January. But so if you have any questions, you can go to theelmlagrange.com. That's our website. We have 2 seasoned operators. They're going to be the head chef and the head GM that have a lot of experience. The executive chef was over at Parker's in Downers, and we're really excited. We'll have multiple private events. We'll have 3 rooms, one of which or 2 of which you can break down into one, and it's a fairly large facility, but we feel that LaGrange could use the private events, and we're also bringing a rooftop deck with an outdoor bar with gas fire pits and a bags area. There will be a kids menu. We understand that there's a lot that goes on with getting a liquor license, so we take that very seriously, and we're just excited to be part of the community.
Thank you. We're
you.
excited to have you. Appreciate that very much.
Thank you.
All right, let us proceed to current business. Item A, LaGrange Business Association 2019 Holiday Walk, request for village sponsorship and hometown holiday promotion, referred to trustee Kotinek.
Great, thank you, Mr. President. Happy to present a request from the LGBA seeking authorization and financial support for the annual holiday walk, which will be held this year, Saturday, December 7th, from 5 to 9 p.m. The event will be similar to past activities, starting off with an all-village sing. At that point, Santa will be making an arrival via the fire department, and then we will light the traditional village tree out front of Village Hall. Santa will then proceed up to this dais with his better half, Mrs. Claus, for photo opportunities. The LGBA intends to have a group of string musicians performing in the lobby while you're waiting for your picture with Santa. Local choirs will also be invited to sing on the steps of the Village Hall from 6 to 8 p.m. prior to the tree lighting. Local merchants will also welcome shoppers into their stores with a variety of activities, specials, and sweet treats. And as in the past, the Holiday Walk will also have a North Pole Express, kiddie train ride, a petting zoo, pony rides, a shopper's trolley service, and ice sculptures will be displayed throughout the village. In an effort to enhance the trolley ride experience and encourage visitors to explore businesses in the West End, the LGBA will be distributing special 3D holiday glasses to riders and organizing a holiday children's activity inside the Stone Avenue train station. In 2018, the overall event expenses for the walk, the Holiday Walk, were approximately $27,300. The LGBA anticipates similar expenses again this year. To help defray some of these marketing and operational costs of the event, the LGBA is requesting that the village co-sponsor the annual Holiday Walk in an amount of $16,000, which is also provided in the annual budget fiscal year 1920. In addition to the $16,000 sponsorship for the Holiday Walk, the village plans to provide additional marketing support for Hometown Holiday campaign in the amount of $9,850. This campaign will be driven by aggressive marketing and publicity efforts with the assistance of Ripon Communications. The campaign runs from Thanksgiving to Christmas and promotes general holiday shopping in LaGrange, as President Livingston had previously mentioned, as well as Small Business Saturday on November 30th, which will take us through the Holiday Walk on the 7th, and then the LGBA Shopper Reward Program. This is now in its 5th year, and the Shopper Reward Program provides a $50 LGBA gift card to qualified customers who spend a minimum of $300 in LaGrange. New this year, Ripson and LGBA are enhancing the Hometown Holiday campaign by adding additional attractions to downtown LaGrange throughout November and December. On the 14th of November, participating businesses will host a holiday shopping preview night for VIP customers and social media influencers. On Small Business Saturday, a flash sale promotion will be available through the LaGrange, Illinois app, and an ice carving demonstration will take place near the Village Hall. Throughout December, visitors can take selfies with Elfies, posing in one of several life-size photo boards that will be placed around town. Returning for its 2nd year, students from the College of DuPage Culinary School will be creating gingerbread houses for display in LaGrange, retailers, and restaurants throughout the month. It's staff's recommendation that the village again support the LGBA's request for sponsorship of the Holiday Walk in an amount not to exceed $16,000 with the following conditions. First, the LGBA will demonstrate good faith efforts to acquire cash sponsorship to match the village's contributions. Next, the LGBA will provide a complete financial accounting for this event no later than March 1st, 2020. Third, the LGBA will provide a complete financial statement for the organization for fiscal year 2019. Fourth, the Village of LaGrange is to be prominently listed on all advertising, including but not limited to posters, websites, advertising, and newspapers. All advertising is to be approved by village staff prior to public presentation. Fifth, the LGBA will comply with all insurance, hold harmless, and indemnification requirements of the village. And lastly, all events are to be coordinated to the satisfaction of the village. This is a well-run event. I see Nancy in the audience, and Nancy, thank you for all your efforts. If I've missed anything that you'd like to add to the overview? Great, thank you. So with that being said, then, at this point, I'd like to make a motion to authorize and financially support the 2019 Hometown Holiday Walk as described.
Thank you, Trustee Kotinik. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. Questions or comments on the motion? Trustee Augustine?
Thank you, Mr. President. I just had one question. How do you become a VIP? It says it's a VIP event. I was just curious if that's limited, if there's some process someone has to go through to get to that. Okay. Okay.
You
So
might have
anyone
to-
can show.
You might have to echo that because it wasn't in the mic. So what's the, go ahead.
The question?
Yeah.
So I was asking how one becomes
So
a
what's the
VIP.
answer?
You're saying that the answer is the retailers will invite their customer list, but that generally it's open. Okay,
Sounded like everyone is a VIP that night.
thank you.
Absolutely. Other questions? Trustee McCarty?
I'd also like to point out that as part of the kickoff for the annual, our holiday event here in LaGrange is also our holiday light collection will be going on again. So as you bring those Christmas tree and outdoor decorating lights out of the box and they're in a complete tangle, you can bring them to one of several drop-off locations in LaGrange and they will be recycled. So thank you.
Thank you for that, indeed. Other questions or comments on this motion? Seeing none, Mr. Clerk, roll call vote.
Trustee McCarty,
Aye.
Trustee Katina,
Aye.
Trustee Holder,
Aye?
Trustee Gale,
Aye.
Trustee Augustine.
Aye.
With that, the motion passes. Item B under current business, preliminary review of the proposed 2019 property tax levy request, referred to Trustee Augustine.
Okay. Thank you again, Mr. President. I will try to keep this important information brief and turn it over to the professionals at the end, but I will read through some of the important highlights of this property tax levy request. It starts with this, the truth in taxation law. This requires us to have a preliminary review of the proposed property tax levy by the corporate authorities at least 20 days prior to the adoption of that tax levy to determine if the aggregate levy is more than 5% greater than the preceding year's tax levy extension, exclusive of debt service. If the preliminary tax levy is estimated to exceed the preceding year's levy by more than 5%, the village must hold a public hearing prior to the adoption of the proposed tax levy. The proposed truth in taxation levy request, excluding debt service, shows a total increase of 3.27% over the prior year's extension. Therefore, the Village of LaGrange is not required to hold a public hearing regarding the 2019 property tax levy. The proposed village property tax levy increase of 3.27% over the prior year's extension, exclusive of debt service, is also subject to the Property Tax Limitation Act, which limits the increase in property tax extensions exclusive of debt service and new property growth to 5%, or the percent of increase in the National Consumer Price Index, CPI, whichever is less. The CPI rate for the 2019 levy determined as of December 2018 was 1.9%. The percentage increase in the tax levy over the 1.9% CPI represents estimated new growth of 9.75 million EAV, to include any increase in the base EAV from the Pathway Aspired Senior Living Residential Development Project. Although we were not able to confirm the new growth figure with various Cook County departments, we do anticipate the aforementioned project may impact the 2019 tax levy as construction is underway and occupancy may occur in spring of 2020. Therefore, for budgeting purposes, we are estimating new growth of 9.75 million EAV, which results in an increase in annual property tax revenue of approximately $50,000. For the past several years, the village has averaged new growth of approximately 3 million EAV, excluding the Uptown LaGrange and 40 South Ashland condominium developments. The village is estimating the higher new growth of 9.75 million EAV as it is critical to capture new growth in the year it becomes available. Otherwise, it becomes part of the succeeding year's base EAV and not subject to an increased levy in future years. If such new growth does not occur as expected, the property tax levy will automatically be lowered by Cook County. What is important to the overall long-term financial condition of the village is that it remains preferable to overestimate than to underestimate new growth to ensure that new growth is captured in the year it becomes available. The village board previously discussed and elected to continue the practice of levying property tax amounts equal to the CPI. While the village's financial plan anticipates the receipt of property tax revenue based on this practice, the village's tax levy is discussed and carefully considered on an annual basis. It is important to note that when the village anticipates significant new growth from developments projects, this does not result in an increase in individual homeowners' property taxes. The limiting rate calculation allows the village to include the increased dollar amount of the property tax levy, which is then distributed over a larger EAV base, which ultimately limits the overall increase on an individual property to the increase in the CPI. Therefore, the impact of the proposed 2019 property tax increase on the average Village of LaGrange home, with an estimated market value of $500,000, is an increase of $26.05 from the village levy. The general levy fund is the under this area, the cumulative increase in this general levy fund of $166,920 is in part due to the projected new growth from Pathway Aspired Senior Living. The general fund levy in total is the amount available under tax cap law after funding the village's pension levies. The police and fire pension fund levies increased by slightly less than expected, primarily due to demographic changes in participant experience. As the pension levies were less than projected, the increase in property tax revenue resulting from the redevelopment projects is available for general fund operations. General fund levies are utilized to support village operating expenditures, including police, fire, public works, community development, finance, and administration. These funds also support major capital improvements, including water, sewer, and street replacement, in accordance with the board's direction. Pension levies. The police and fire pension levies reflect the annual required contributions based on independent actuarial valuations of each fund for the year ended April 30th, 2019. The reports were prepared by the Police and Fire Pension Fund's independent actuary, Mr. Todd Schroeder from Lauterbach and Amen. For budgetary purposes, based upon current actuarial assumptions and funding methods, we expect the annual required contributions, the pension tax levies, to increase by approximately 4.5% annually. As noted earlier in this report, 2019 employer contributions increased by 2.3%. In just a minute, I will ask the Police and Fire Pension Fund's independent actuary, Mr. Todd Schroeder, who's here tonight from Lauterbach and Amen, to discuss the results of the actuarial valuations in more detail and answer any questions from the village board. Mr. Schroeder had presented the valuation report to the Fire Pension Board on Tuesday, October 8th. The village has received a letter from the Fire Pension Board requesting and staff recommends that the village levy funds in the amount of $1,269,662 or 100% of the recommended actuarial contribution. Prior to Mr. Schroeder meeting with the Police Pension Board on Wednesday, October 23rd, pension reform legislation was introduced in the legislative veto session. This provided the Police Pension Board with an opportunity to discuss the potential impacts of the legislation if the legislation was approved as introduced. In anticipation of potential approval of pension reform legislation, the village has reviewed a letter from the Police Pension Fund Board requesting the village levy funds in excess of the actuarial recommended contribution. Historically, the village has levied 100% of the actuarial recommendation contributions for both police and fire pension funds. The Police Pension Board is requesting a levy of $1,712,648, or 100.01% of the actuarial recommended contribution. Staff recommends the village levy $1,692,307, or 100% of the actuarial recommended contribution. Library tax levy. The Grange Library is classified as a municipal library rather than as a separate public library district. As a municipal library, the library does not have its own authority to levy property taxes. Therefore, the library must levy taxes as part of the village's annual property tax levy. The library's 2019 tax levy request of $2,466,664, exclusive of debt service, also represents an increase of 3.27% over the 2018 property tax levy extension. This amount reflects the allowable increase under the Property Tax Limitation Act and is equal to the amount of the increase of the village tax levy request. Special Service Area Levy 7. As part of the annual property tax levy, a Special Service Area Levy is filed with the Cook County to fund ongoing maintenance of the Central Business District. The Special Service Area tax levy is not subject to truth and taxation requirements. The Special Service Area encompasses all commercial properties within the Central Business District, excluding any single-family and multifamily properties. By ordinance, the Special Service Area is to be adjusted annually by the Consumer Price Index, utilized as part of the Property Tax Limitation Act. Therefore, the 2019 Special Service Area levy of $90,601 reflects an increase of 1.9% over last year's levy of $88,912. We're getting close. Special Service Area Levy 9 is part of the Uptown LaGrange Development Project. In its initial year, 2016, the village approved a special service area ordinance to establish a reserve fund in the amount of $10,000 for maintenance, repair, construction, replacement, and replacement of similar services for the Ogden-LaGrange sidewalk. Pursuant to the SSA ordinance, in subsequent years, the village will discontinue the levy until such time is expended from the reserve fund, at which time the village will then levy the amount necessary to replenish the reserve fund of $10,000 plus interest at a rate not to exceed 5% per year. As no funds were expended from the reserve for sidewalk maintenance or repair, the village will not impose a levy for SSA 9 as part of the 2019 property tax levy request to Cook County. So for the purposes of further discussion, I recommend that the village board approve the attached resolution announcing an estimated 2019 tax levy of $9,864,854 exclusive of debt service, which is a 3.27% increase from the 2018 tax levy. And now I'd like to introduce and invite Mr. Todd Schroeder to present information regarding the actuarial valuations and pension tax levies. Welcome, Mr. Schroeder.
All right, well, thank you for having me out this year. This is Kevin Cavanaugh. He works with me. He's passing out the same summary that we've had in the past. We do about 200 pages worth of work, actuarial work for the village. We try to boil it down to a key 6 or 7 pages here to go over as part of this meeting. So that's what he's handing out right now. So it's the same information that's in the reports, but summarized in this condensed format. So I'll walk through a high-level review of the information. If I go on too long, let me know. I could go grab that other mic if you're tired of hearing from me, the one that doesn't work. But I'll try to get through this efficiently and answer any questions you have on the process. And if you look at the first page of the summary, as was talked about in the summary already in the memo, we're looking at a contribution recommendation for the 2 pension funds combined. It's about 2.5%, roughly 2.5% higher than it was last year, and that's lower than the expected increase in the contribution as part of this process. So at the top of page 1 there, we're approaching $3 million, $2,962,000 approximately combined between the 2 pension funds for the recommended funding. Last year, that number was just shy of $2.9 million combined for the 2 pension funds. The pension funds are sitting about between 48 and 49% funded, and they did improve about 1.5 percentage points year over year in funded percentage. So we see the steady increase, the steady improvement in that, which is what we would expect year over year. Right now, between the 2 pension funds, there's about $34.2 million of unfunded liability. That's scheduled to be paid off between now and 2040 as part of this annual actuarial process. And the funds that we've talked about in the past, these are mature funds. And if you look at the bottom of page 1, what that means is we've got more folks in retirement status or in payment status than we have in active status as members of the pension fund. If you look at the second page of the summary, I won't go through this in detail. This is part of your audit as well, but this is your change in assets year over year. I'll go to the bottom line. Ultimately, the net position increase between the 2 pension funds by about $1.7 million. So this includes contributions in from the employees, contributions from the village, benefit payments going out, investment income coming in, and administrative expenses paid by the pension funds. And again, this should just echo what you see or what you have seen already as part of your audit for the pension funds. On page 3, this is a number we discuss each year as well. This is our look forward, and the funding we're doing for the pensions right now is really built on this basis. It's what are the benefit payments that the funds are going to have to pay on a going forward basis. If you look at the right-hand column on page 3, between the 2 pension funds, we're sitting between 3.4 and 3.5 million in regular benefit payments that went out last year between the 2 pension funds. In 5 years, we expect that number to be around 4.4 million. And in 10 years, we're looking at about 5.2 million in cash outflow for the 2 pension funds. Because these funds are mature, they have seen a lot of folks already come into retirement status. Those increases that you see are less than what we see for the average Illinois police and fire pension funds. On the 5-year number, it's about a 25 to 30% increase in benefit payments going out. Our average pension funds are about 40 to 45% increase. On the 10-year number, you're looking at about a 50 to 55% increase in cash outflow between the two pension funds over current levels. Our average pension funds are sitting right around 80% for our average Illinois police and fire pension funds on those figures. One thing we talked about, and something that's a little bit new this year, we talked about at the pension board meetings, was we are keeping an eye on the benefit payments as they increase related to the level of assets. So the assets went up this year and the benefit payments went up this year. That's a good thing. Right now, your benefit payments sit right about 10.6%. For fire, it's 10.4%, and for police, it's 10.7%. What I mean is your benefit payments are approximately 10 to 11% of the value of the assets. As that number starts to approach 12.5%, we do start to have some concerns about liquidity, making sure there's enough money set aside to pay benefits, and not so much that the money is there to pay benefits, but rather that money then won't be invested to pay benefits. So you keep a certain amount of cash on hand, not in the markets, to make sure that it's there to pay benefits. So we want to make sure that as the benefit payments increase and the assets increase over time, that percentage isn't increasing too quickly. So it's something we'll continue to keep an eye on and continue to watch. And we have a section in the report where we talk about that as well in more detail. Page 4 gives us our year-over-year changes in contributions. As you've heard a couple of times now, the contribution increased year-over-year, but did not increase as much as we would expect from a standard increase standpoint. If you look at the top line on page 4 on the right-hand side, we expected about a $100,000 increase in contribution between the two funds. And as you work your way down, it gives you the variety of factors that impacted that up or down to get us to our ultimate increase in contribution year over year. Pay increases for both pension funds came in a bit less than expected, so we're projecting lower pay at retirement now, so we're projecting lower benefits at retirement. Therefore, we pulled the contribution back related to the pay experience for the year. Demographic changes, if you look at the combined column there, and that's movements within your population, was pretty much a wash for between the two pension funds. We did see a decrease on the fire side and an increase on the police side. On page 5 there, we've got a couple of the key factors that caused those. On the fire side, there was a retiree that passed away during the year. We saw a decrease related to that in the funding. That was the biggest piece of the decrease on the fire side. On the police side, we saw a couple members purchase additional service in the pension fund, and so we had an increase on the demographic side related to those members of about $12,000 related to the additional liability that comes in with that service. For the current year, we don't have any assumption changes recommended, so you see a 0 on that line. The next line is our investment experience. So we look at, as we have in the past, we look at this on a rolling 5-year basis. So we're not taking in 100% of what happened in fiscal 19 in terms of determining this contribution. We're taking part of fiscal 19, but also part of fiscal 18, 17, 16, and 15 as we look backwards. And based on that, between the two pension funds, we had about a $6,300 increase in contribution based on the 5 years of investment returns that we looked at being less than expectation. So we increased the contribution about $6,300. Next line, contributions were slightly higher than expected for the current year in this process. On the police side, a lot of that was related to the service that was purchased. The employee contribution side was actually higher. So we saw on the demographic changes the contribution went up a bit for the additional liability. Here the contribution is going down a bit from the additional contributions that had to come into the pension fund to purchase that service as part of this process. So if you throw everything into the wash, we expected about a $100,000 increase in contribution. The actual increases year over year were about $75,000 between the two pension funds. As I mentioned, page 5 has your key demographic changes year over year. In each of the individual reports for the police and fire pension funds in the management summary, there's more detail on some of the other changes that happened, but these are the key things that drove the contributions in the directions we saw. In page 6, I won't go over this in great detail. This is very similar to page 4 where we look at changes in contribution. except on page 6, we're doing it on a funded percentage basis. So you can see how your funded percentage moves year over year related to the exact same factors that we just talked about on the contribution side. And finally, page 7, these are just how the figures show up in the financial statements. So we have, for each pension fund, 2 separate reports we have to do. One related to the cash funding of the pension, which is what everything has been that we're talking about so far up to this point. The second thing we do is we provide a report for your financial statements, and those are based on separate rules. So it's not Illinois funding rules, it's based on National Government Accounting Standards rules as part of this process. So these 2 figures, net pension liability and total pension expense, will show up and do show up as part of your financial statements in this process. A couple other things we looked at or that we talked about at the pension meetings, and it was mentioned in the memorandum. There's some additional or some potential out there for Tier 2 members to receive increased benefits based on some legislation that was introduced at the state level related to benefits. And the issue really boils down to there's a fear that at some point in the future, and probably a valid fear that at some point in the future, that the benefits provided to the Tier 2 members in each of these pension funds. So Tier 2 are members who were hired January 1, 2011 or later and did not have service in another pension fund prior to that. So anybody who was new, who was hired after January 1, 2011 would potentially fall in this bucket. In order for public safety to be exempt from Social Security, the benefits that they get in their pension plan have to be at least as high as Social Security. Tier 2 benefits, bottom line is Tier 2 benefits and Social Security both have pay caps in them. Social Security's pay cap goes up higher or more quickly than Tier 2 pay cap does. And so what's going to happen at some point in the future is there's going to potentially be, at least the fear is, and again, I think it's valid at least at some point in the future, that with the increases in Social Security cap being more rapid than the increase in the Tier 2 pay cap, that the Tier 2 benefits are no longer going to meet that standard of providing at least as much as Social Security would provide. So there is some legislation introduced, and it, in fact, will be discussed this week, that it has a fix in there for that. So bottom line is, one of the things we talked about, and one of the reasons why the Police Pension Board was looking for some additional funding, is if that passes, you could see an increase in the contribution related to that legislation for Tier 2 members in subsequent reports based on the increased benefits that would come. And I think the primary change that's going to cause the increase, there's a few changes listed. I think the primary change that's going to cause the increase is that they're going to have the Tier 2 pay cap increase with the Consumer Price Index, where previously it was increasing at half of what the Consumer Price Index was each year. So if that change goes through, it will cause an increase in contribution. Much of the liability in these pension funds is with Tier 1 members, so all the liability for retirees, those are all Tier 1 members, so that's not impacted by this. For your active folks who are working prior to January 1, 2011, they're also Tier 1 members. They would not be impacted by this change either. So it's a potential for an increase, but it is on a smaller portion of the liability in the pension fund. So I wouldn't expect it to be a horrible number in terms of the increase, or as big as some of the other changes that we've talked about in the past several years. But it's something that's on the radar as part of this.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Yeah, we'll have some questions. I do appreciate it. To the board, tonight's action is a discussion on the levy, and then we will actually, yes. Oh, I thought somebody was calling me. And then we will be taking a vote on this at our regular meeting on December the 9th, in terms of the levy. So I'm going to ask a few questions, and then we'll open it up for some public questions. And then I'd like the board also to ask any questions that you might have as follow-up. And then there's a resolution here that we will be acting on tonight as it relates to the levy. That simply says that we don't have to hold a public hearing related to the levy, and it also serves as a communication device to our residents as to what we're looking at the upcoming meeting in terms of the levy amount. Okay, just a few questions, and then again, we'll have some comment if there is any. This is a certified statement that neither you or I, or you or I, Lou, had rehearsed this ahead of time, so I'm just asking questions, okay? And excuse the lack of order on this, just a couple of things. Starting out more simply, levy, our reserves, what percentage are our reserves, Lou, at this point? 60, 61?
Correct. We're slightly over $9 million in total in reserves, and it's about 61% of the annual operating expenditures.
Okay, so that has improved slightly from the last couple of fiscal years?
That's correct. Yeah, we're up probably 3 or 4 percentages over the last couple of years.
Okay, and then this levy would propose a budget that contributes 100% to our pension obligations actuarially?
Correct. Our recommendation is to levy 100% of the recommended actuarial contributions based on the valuations.
And the police pension board recommended 100 point, what is it?
100.01%.
Okay. And that in numerical value for the village finances is about $20,000?
Correct.
Okay. All right. The tax levy is 1.3% proposed?
The total tax levy increase
Yes.
is a total of 3.27%, inclusive of the 1.9% CPI.
Okay, and then when you run that through the formula, what is the, on the other side of the equal bar? Is it 1.3 or 1.9?
1.9.
Okay.
That's the CPI, correct.
Okay, and what was our levy last year?
In terms of dollars?
Yes. No, percentage.
Percentage increase, I believe we were 2.78% in total.
Okay. So this year is slightly less of an increase in the levy.
It's a slightly larger percentage increase. Last year we were 2.78. This year it's 3.27.
Okay.
That's really because of the additional new growth figure
Right.
for the aspired living.
But the actual amount allowed under the Property Tax Act is less than that, is it not? It's CPI, right?
Correct. That's
Okay.
correct.
And when we have projects like MI, as I think Trustee Augustine said, we do not count those chickens as part of growth?
Not at this particular time, based on construction and pending occupancy.
Okay. And Mr. Schroeder, thank you again. That was a very thorough report. I know there's several bills pending in Springfield. Actually, they're not bills yet. They're just ideas. I don't think I've seen any language. Is there any language as to the effective date if the Tier 2 changes were to be made that you've seen?
If the Tier 2 changes, the last I saw was the effective date of the whole bill that had that piece incorporated in it would be July of 2020 was the effective date that they
Okay.
were aiming towards.
Yeah.
That was the last I seen, though, and that certainly is subject to change.
Okay. And that veto session starts tomorrow. I'd like to talk about the item in your report under the management summary. Let's get back to the 10.7%.
Sure.
As it relates to the ratio. You know, we have a 7% return on our investment. There's certain levers a village board can pull in terms of changing that ratio. Am I thinking in the right lane here? Is it paying more improves the ratio in terms of?
Yeah, certainly paying more would improve the ratio. It's, you know, again, with the 10 to 11% you're paying out right now, the concern starts to become on that return you talked about, the 7% return that we want the assets to kick in. There's a couple concerns on that front. One, obviously markets are volatile, so who knows where the actual assets will move from a year-to-year basis. Two, there's some capital market information that investment advisors put out as part of this process that is suggesting the potential for some slowdown on investment returns, giving us what they had given in the past. Now, which could make the 7% number potentially more of a struggle than it might have been previously. And this could be, I guess, potentially a third factor in the struggle to get 7%, is that if the benefit payments get too high as a percentage of the assets, that's just more money you're keeping in cash. Let's say you keep 3, 4, 5 months worth in cash to pay out benefits, to make benefit payments, let's say between pension board meetings, 3 months in cash. As that number gets higher, you're just pulling more and more money out of the markets.
Okay. Last couple of questions as it relates to the rate of return on the village. I saw that I believe at least one of the funds, it was about 6.8% over 5 years when you do the smoothing. What's our rate of return in terms of actual versus our estimated 7% over 5-10 years?
Over the last 5 years, I believe we're about 6.3%.
Okay.
Last 10 years, it's actually 7.8%. So both on either sides of what our assumption estimate is.
And these, of course, are long-term actuarial pursuits. So do we have a number? Again, I'm sorry, I'm putting you on the spot. Over, I don't know, 20 years, 30 years, where we stand, and that includes the Great Recession.
One of the items that we talked about at both the police and fire pension funds was that very fact, is trying to hone in on a number that captures really what the time frame is that we're looking at. It's not the 5-10 year horizon. As Todd mentioned, these funds would be fully funded by 2040, but they'll certainly go on beyond that. One of the things that we looked at was what has been our 50-year return going backwards based on our current mix of equities and fixed income models, using just a general S&P 500 and Treasury bills and a 60-40 split between the funds. Looking back 50 years, it's right about a 7% return overall. Not knowing what the future is going to hold, looking backwards, I think, was the only thing that I had suggested that we might look at in terms of what a good estimate number might be for a long-term rate of return.
Last question, Mr. Schroeder, for me, and then we'll move on here. As it relates to the funding ratio, the 10%, 10.7, can you indicate kind of the range of what you're seeing amongst, the not so good example of other municipalities in Illinois necessarily, but we got to compare to somebody. So what are you seeing?
This number it's got a pretty wide range to it. We've seen some as low as 2.5%, 3%. I guess theoretically we have some that are 0%. Those are young fire protection districts with no retirees, so it's probably not a good comparison. But if you look at folks who have started to build some retiree population, I would say 4 to 5% on the good end of the spectrum, and 20, 25% on the bad end of the spectrum.
Okay. Well, again, appreciate both of you answering those questions. Some of those questions I asked, I think I knew the answer, but I think it helps just to kind of draw that out. And we have more work to do in LaGrange on the pension front, clearly, but this budget would reflect at least a 100% contribution on both the police and the fire. I see Andrew James tried to sneak by me in the back all the way here. He sits on our police pension board, and we appreciate your service as well. This is something where, yes, we've seen some improvement. We have published what we expect on our rate of returns and what we use as actuarial or demographic tables. So with that, we communicate to the public kind of what we're going after. So I guess to the entire board, we need to think if those rates of return are accurate. I do feel good that, again, directionally, slowly but surely, we're getting there. Actuarially, we're practicing the 100% rule. We have to remember that we're not like some of our neighbors with car dealerships and huge business districts with not as many residents. We're right in a very special tipping point here in LaGrange. So $20,000 or any amount is a significant amount of money when we've got competing priorities, but certainly managing our pensions is a high priority. So those are the kind of things we discuss. But I like directionally what we see. Got a lot more work to do, obviously, on that. So with that, why don't we open it up if there are any public comments or questions for us at this point, and then we'll go back to the board.
Thanks, Tom. My name's Andrew James. Most of you don't know me. It's been a pleasure to serve on the board for the police program for the last 3 years. So I had a few prepared remarks, and Todd did a good job of addressing what you got in our letter, and Tom, you asked good questions to sort of flesh that out. It's hard to know if the rest of the dais up there, I was looking for body language, was internalizing the questions you were asking, if you guys have had questions on the past. So I guess one of the things that I'd like to stress is that number that Todd talked about, that 10.7, and in the management section he calls out at 12.5, it becomes an issue. My thinking as a trustee, my individual thinking, but we talked a lot about this as a group, is that let's not go there, because when you get there, you lose flexibility in how you manage the portfolio. So as a trustee and as an investment professional, you would have to change the mix of the assets to a lower risk mix of assets to ensure that you have enough cash and ability to make the payments to the very mature program we have. So we've got, I don't know the exact numbers that are in here, but it's we have a large population that are already actively in retirement, that are drawing benefits. So we need to meet those payments. And to make sure that happens, we would have to shift to a lower risk program. And the consequence of that is it puts us in a harder position to make that 7% return that we need, that we are discounting those future liabilities at. And that discount rate, poor Lou knows, is sort of a bugaboo of mine, and I have to compliment him publicly. If all of government worked, he had the discussions the way we do. Lou and I disagree about this, but disagree in such a professional manner is a real credit to the village, that the way he keeps his cool with my sort of persistence on this issue. The whole world would work better if it was filled with Lou's. So I guess one of the things I'd point out, you asked about that expected return, something for you to think about, and really, when we wrote the letter to you asking for more than we typically had, that was an unusual event. It was based on the fact that we think that Tier 2 is out of that safe harbor provision. Springfield can do what they want, but I think the IRS is going to show up at some point in time and say, you're in violation. It doesn't take Springfield to act. So we pulled that in, but we also looked at that 10.7 issue as being an issue. And then my suspicion that 7 is not high enough. So history has maybe borne that out in the management reports you have. If you look closely, you'll see in the last 5 years, actuarially, we've only exceeded 7% one time. So we've had very good bull market in equities, and we've not crossed that line but one time. It was 7.1%. That's troubling to me. The other issue is that we have exceptionally low interest rates, and we have statutory minimums and maximums of how much equities we can have. So that leaves us to be in a very low bond environment. And the billion-dollar question is, how long will those rates remain low? I recognize that's almost impossible to forecast, but it's not uncommon that they could last for a long time. And I can give these charts to anybody who wants them, but after the Great Depression, we had 31 years of low rates. We had the Long Depression back in late 1800s, 32 years of low rates. It's not unlikely that we're 10 years into low rates. Fed just cut again. So assuming that we're going to get historical rates of returns like we got before, when a big portion of our assets are in bonds, I don't think is a prudent decision. So we asked for what I think is, I recognize the competing responsibilities you all have in terms of managing the village. I respect that, and I know that's a challenge, but $20,000 is the ask for what you budgeted for last year. If we pushed harder and had an even more rigorous discussion, we might have asked for more. But that takes an assumption change, and that's a big deal, as you all know. So we asked for a little, $20,000 is not insignificant, but it's 100.01%. Puts us a little closer, a little out of danger, and I think that's a big deal. I guess one last thing, because you don't know me, why should you listen to me? Listen, predictions of the future are very hard. I'll first admit it. What's my day job? I work for the University of Chicago, help manage their endowment. My responsibility is the long-only public portfolio. Manage about $3.5 billion, been doing that for about 10 years. I'm on an investment committee for a closely held corporation that has intergenerational issues, so I think a lot about these issues: risk, asset allocation, forward returns. It's tricky business. It's hard to be sure. And I guess just to stress one last thing, and I'm done. It's been a long meeting, and Betsy did a wonderful job reading a very dry materials. And I'm sorry to add to it. In the reports, you'll see what our asset allocation is, or what Lauterbach and Amon uses to project that 7%. It says equities are going to earn 7, emerging markets are going to earn 9, bonds are going to earn 3.5, and we take the weights, and there's a statutory maximum how much equity we can have, and you take those numbers and you multiply them together, and it gives you an expected return of 5.7%. That's a big deal. If you flip the page in that report, if we're off by 1%, the liabilities is massively misstated. So I know there's competing responsibilities, but that's why I just want a little more context as to why we did the unusual thing of asking you for 20 grand more.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you for your service. Other comments? All right, as we transition back to trustee comments, I think what Andrew was talking about was an estimate from last year's budget, and I understand the perspective there. That estimate sometimes can be lower, so I don't know if we want to get into the precedent of targeting it to our estimate. We estimate what we think healthcare costs are going to be. We estimate what the pension obligation is going to be, and then life happens. Demographic impacts happen. So we're really sticking with the actuarial, but I think we're in agreement, or at least I am, that we need to take a keener look at the rate of return over time. Now, what that equals is more money going to pensions now and away from other things. And so that requires either cuts in other locations of village services or revenue increases, AKA property taxes. So that as a village, all of you and we have to look at and make decisions on. But I think the pension boards and Lou and Todd, we're all kind of in the same place here. We're looking ahead and trying to meet our obligation and get ahead of the coming issues with pensions. So with that, I'll open it up for some conversation and questions with colleagues on the board here. Trustee Holder.
Lou or Andre, I guess, are the right people for this. The tax levy is an increase of 3.27%. What is our, and we've already heard about the pension liabilities and the returns and the risks there. What is our health care? What are our benefits going up this year, or projected to be?
We do not have the renewal for this year currently, but we're budgeting them to go up by 5%. Our renewal contract will be up June 1 of next year.
June 1 of next year, okay. So 5% just for healthcare?
That's our current budgeted estimate, that's
Okay.
correct.
Okay. And so in other words, our tax increase doesn't even cover healthcare, much less any investment or anything else that we're trying to do.
Correct.
So to your point of continuing our conservative bent that we've been successful with for years. No other questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Holder. Other questions, comments? I have a question for Lou. So the new property where the Masonic homes, the MI homes, the additional revenues from that are expected as a result. Why don't you go into that, what the increase of that is estimated to be?
From the Masonic homes?
Masonic home, thank you.
Yeah, the MI homes, that's not reflected in our current budget document
Right.
right now.
Yes.
I believe the total increase from both the townhomes and the single-family homes were right around, somewhere between $75,000 and $100,000 in total.
Okay, so that's a 9-acre parcel of land, kind of once in a generation. And so when we're talking about 20,000, I think it's, you know, it can be significant in terms of a commitment. I completely understand where the fire or the police pension board's coming from, but I'm just, as a context, and even the one-time increase with the pathways behind was, what was that about?
It's about $50,000
About 50,000, so.
annually, right?
Okay. So it's good that we're growing economically in LaGrange and the base. And we don't have the same kind of opportunities for a large business district, or we don't want to put a lot of tax burden on our, you know, our residential, our citizens, our fellow citizens. So anyway, kind of asking questions out loud as an order of magnitude.
I think the other significant factor that weighs into all this is our capital contributions. It's one of the, I know Ryan's not here tonight, but I'm sure he would bring up the fact that there's many streets that he would like to have resurfaced or reconditioned. So something that we're always looking at and trying to increase what those contributions are to keep up with our aging infrastructure here in the village.
And in 2010, that contribution was about $1 million a year,
Correct.
and we dropped it to 700,000 at some point.
$700,000 currently, right?
Okay. So, you know, this is, again, well done to both the fire and police pension boards in terms of calling our attention to these things and making us think hard. You've got a mission. It's a very important mission to us, as do we have a mission up here at the rostrum, which, of course, is a slightly wider lens. So I think we need to continue, as we did make adjustments, about 4 years ago, 5 years ago now, to the rate of return.
Actually, I think it was about 7 or 8 years
Is
ago.
that right?
we
Boy,
made a
time
change.
flies. You know, we need to continue to look at that. Use your document as a tool, Mr. Schroeder, Todd, and you know, I think everybody is of the same mind here. Directionally good, but this is serious stuff. And we've also learned up here at this rostrum, we can I guess, anticipate what Springfield's going to do, but Springfield, when it comes to pension reform and other things, is a strewn landscape of mortar shells and broken clay bits, and they never quite get to it. So it'll be interesting to see on the Tier 2 and what happens in the next 72 hours in terms of consolidation and things like that. We might have to come back, and I asked the board for their flexibility as we look ahead here in the coming weeks, depending on what happens in Springfield. Sorry that went a little longer. Oh, Dave, please. Trustee McCarty.
You brought up an interesting point, and I was wondering, relative to that extra 0.01%, if Springfield were to combine the pension funds, does that help us with that issue that now we are able to put more of our money into the better funding, or well, how does that impact us if we become part of a bigger fund?
That's actually a really good question. I think there's a couple competing factors out there. Certainly what they're looking to do is put all the assets together and at the same time open up the some of the investment restrictions that Andrew was talking about in terms of what you have right now locally with investment restrictions with these pension funds. So what they're looking to do is combine them and open up those restrictions that will allow more flexibility in the investments. You know, the two risks are, with that fund, what would the expectations be? If you look at some of the statewide funds that are out there, you see a lot of them having these same conversations about bringing those expectations down, which ultimately are going to drive cost. So that's one factor to look at. And the other factor is any type of, if there's a major type of rebalancing that happens with assets, and you move a lot at one time, you always run the risk of inadvertently market timing as well. So it could get off to a really good start or a really bad start, potentially after that happened. But yeah, the concept is over the long run, with more flexibility with the investment mix, more flexibility would be more return. So ultimately, to pay the benefits you're seeing in here, there's going to be more coming in from returns. It just may be some time before you see that the reality come to fruition on that.
One other question, and this is only anecdotally, it seems like the churn particularly in the police force is a higher rate. I don't know if that's a millennial thing or, you know, the days of becoming a cop and staying a cop for life in the same town don't seem to be that way. How does that impact us, that we're seeing more churn at a younger age through the force?
Yeah, as folks, it's a couple things. When folks terminate employment and go to another, let's say go to another force, you potentially see from a pension, purely a pension contribution standpoint, you see some gain related to that event, especially if you have Tier 1 members who are leaving and Tier 2 members are coming in behind them because their benefit structure as it sits right now is less costly. So just purely from a pension funding standpoint, it creates the cycle of getting from an active member standpoint, getting the lower cost folks in, potentially replacing folks that are higher cost. We're still not seeing in general high termination rates, I would say, relative to the rest of the world and from a professional standpoint. But any increase we see in termination rates could accelerate that process of getting the Tier 2 members into the pension fund.
Thank you, Trustee McCarty. Any other questions? Lou, thank you very much. You did that well. We peppered you with a lot of questions. Todd, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great job. We appreciate it. Andrew, thank you as well. With that, to the board, we have a resolution here. I'm going to ask Clerk Burns to read into the record, pretty short here, and then we'll ask for some action here.
Village of LaGrange resolution. Resolution publishing proposed real estate tax levy for fiscal year 2020-21. Whereas the Village of LaGrange is required by law to determine the amounts of money estimated to be necessary to be raised by taxation for the upcoming fiscal year upon taxable property in the village, and whereas the village is required under state statute 35 Illinois CS 200/18-55 to make such a determination at least 20 days prior to the date of a required public hearing. Therefore, it is hereby resolved by the President and the Board of Trustees of the Village of LaGrange that the estimated amount of said levy is hereby determined to be the sum total amount of $9,864,854. Resolved in open meeting this 11th day of November 2019.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Do we have a motion to approve the resolution?
So moved.
Thank you,
Second.
Trustee Holder. Thank you, Trustee Gale. Discussion once more on the resolution before us. Seeing none, Mr. Clerk, roll call vote.
Trustee Augustine.
Aye.
Trustee Gale.
Aye.
Trustee Holder.
Aye.
Trustee Kotinek.
Aye.
Trustee McCarty.
Aye.
With that, the motion is approved. Good discussion. Thank you again, and more to come on that at our upcoming meetings. We'll now move to item 7 on our agenda this evening, which is public comments regarding matters not on our agenda. Seeing none, would ask if there are any trustee comments this evening. Trustee McCarty.
Thank you, President Livingston. We almost never have a meeting here in which somebody doesn't say something about what makes LaGrange a special village. Some say it's our downtown, some say it's the schools, some say it's the parks, some say it's the houses. I'm here today to tell you I know what it is. It's the people. they make a huge difference. Whether it's the first responders or the business unit, my friends here on the dais, neighbors, business owners, even people that didn't know my daughter. So many of them helped in so many ways. And it's you people that I need to thank because you make LaGrange a really special place. Thank you very much for everything you've done for me and my family in the last 2 weeks.
To you as well. Trustee Augustine.
Thank you. I have one question for Ryan. You're Ryan's second in command, so I'm hoping you can handle this softball. I woke up today to a little bit of snow. I was in complete denial over it. I didn't think it was going to happen, and we got it. I don't think there was any plowing out today, or maybe there was a little bit, and I was just kind of wondering, what is the determining factor for when we say, let's get out there and plow? I wasn't very deep today, but I felt like the last little snow, there may have been some plows out. So I'm just curious, kind of what triggers that? What amount of accumulation and at what time and what kind of day?
Are you saying what triggered the plowing
Yeah,
operation?
did we plow today or anywhere?
Yeah,
Okay.
Yes, we did.
Okay.
Yeah, got the call from the police department roughly about 4:30 in the morning. And at that time, went out there, assessed the streets and executed the operations, calling in the personnel. One of the issues we had with the plowing today is, if you notice, there's still leaves in the roadway. Normally, we would curb the snow all the way to the curb, but we avoided curbing today because of the leaves. We didn't want to end up pushing those leaves back up, so that was a challenge that we had out there. And the temperatures changing. We spend majority of the day out there, so I told the guys we have to hit it hard because the temperatures are going to drop tonight below freezing, and it'll make things even harder out there.
Yeah, it's definitely slippery. So I was just curious. I'm sure we wouldn't do it for a quarter of an inch, maybe not a half an inch, but today it seemed
No,
like a
it
little
was,
bit over that. 2
I
inches.
believe, about 3 inches of snow out there.
Okay. Not well timed for commuters either. Okay, thanks. I was just curious how
Thank you.
calculated.
Thank you, Trustee Augustine. And Mike, thank the team. You've got white snow on green leaves here, so we're converging. We know that's a lot of extra in
And
terms
still
of
leaves in the tree.
Yeah, right. Our rakes know that. So thank you, and be safe out there to everybody. Other comments?
I had one more if I could.
Yes, Trustee Augustine, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. On Friday, I went to a community diversity showing of a movie called The Long Shadow, and it's about racism, and it was wonderful, and it was informative. This is a great group in the village, and they work with other villages, and they're having another event tomorrow night at the Emmanuel Episcopal Church, and it's called Uncomfortable Discussion. And it's a great way to talk about racism and bias and how we all fit into it. And it's a healthy group of diverse individuals, young and old, of all races. And I'd recommend it if any of you can go to look into that. And again, it's the community diversity group that puts that on. Thanks.
Thank you, Trustee Augustine. Good information. Uncomfortable discussion. That's a sequel to tonight's pension discussion, maybe. I don't know. We'll see. Trustee Palermo, thank you for attending this evening. We have no items to consider under closed session this evening. Item 10, of course, is a motion to adjourn. Would seek that.
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We're adjourned until November the 25th at 6 p.m. at the hospital. Thank you.